Well, all
And
right.
I visited my salamanders yesterday, and a couple of the older ones are not looking well, but the youngsters are okay.
Well, that's good.
I have to change their water by hand in the summer. I get reverse osmosis, and then resalted water for them. They call it spring water.
All right. Welcome, Morgan. Welcome, Susan. Uh, do you have any updates? I know that Susan gave me a paper last week. Well, I'll try to present it here today, but anything else of note?
No, it's just that the paper, because I can't read it and or not well.
Okay. Well, we'll go over that then.
And I like to make notes here if I can get it to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
It's not working. It's oh well.
Yeah. Let me. First, I want to go over a couple things from Barshan's work. So Barshan has been presenting in our open source meeting on Fridays. He presented this last week on some work he's been doing, really in testing out his SGel model. So it's really coming along pretty well. He's issued a couple of pull requests to the repo. So the first one is this implement dynamic tensor masking loader and optimize EAM latency. So this was for the stuff he did last, I think, like a week, 2 weeks ago. And this is some of that work. That was a success in terms of being accepted. It's just making some changes to epic dataset.py and sgleam.py, and then adding a visualization and validation test to both test loader py and visualize training py respectively. Looks like Ashu is here. Welcome, Ashu. The second pull request is added UI page and some checkpoints of evaluation. So that's number 60. This is it's pretty large pull request. This is the checkpoints for SGel, and you have a bunch of JSON and PNG files here. This is just showing the different um, results that he's gotten from his testing. So a confusion matrix, and this is just analyzing the input data. So this is kind of validating that, and then training the model and showing the results there. Then there's the dashboard. That is, he created a dashboard kind of vibe coded it, and then created it in a web browser. So this is where you can explore the EPIC dataset, which is one of the main C. elegans cell tracking datasets, and look at those different edges that he's looking at in SGel, and see what changes in edge attention look like as the embryo expands in terms of the number of cells. Then there's some scripts down here. This is for importing data or exporting data. And so that was a pretty extensive pull request there. So thank you, Barshan, for those pull requests. And this is again on the DevoGraph repository for DevoLearn. Oh yeah, yeah. So that was a book review that I did I think it was last year. And this is just a new book on Bradenburg vehicles and cognitive science. It's I thought it was a good book. Someone else's book that they wrote, and they did it like kind of a more mathematical treatment of Bradenburg vehicles. Where they were looking at like coupled vehicles and the whole math of like how they move and how they synchronize, and a lot of interesting things there for um, very small organisms as well. So like Valentino Bratenberg was interested in insects and insect neuroanatomy, and so he derived a lot of his insights from all of that work that he did over the course of like 30 or 40 years. And then he turned his attention to building these agents. Actually, he didn't really think about them as agents. It was kind of like a set of thought experiments where he drew little agents that had sensors and effectors. So they had sensory organs and they had things that made them move. And then they had this
Oh,
nervous system.
would it be worthwhile getting that book then?
Yeah, I think it would be, if that's something that you're interested in, yeah. I think it's a good book, yeah.
I could tell you more about axolotl salamanders and
Yeah.
where I got them. I got them from University of Kentucky, and then they moved. I forgot. There's amblyostoma research. Oh, and they're University of Kentucky, I think. And they sell salamanders, axolotl salamanders, and their eggs for classroom use and for research. And as a private citizen, I can't get any, and it costs a fortune to get them across the border because they're listed as an endangered species. But what you're actually buying is a lab animal. It's sort of like the ones in the wild are pretty much extinct, but the ones that people used and also raise as pets are also considered endangered, but they would never survive in the wild. People, there's different kinds of them, and there's eyeless ones, and they used to have mosaic ones, and they quit raising the mosaic ones because of the deformities that they sometimes get. And I saw that firsthand, and it looks like it's the blastocele that is improperly formed in those animals. So I wanted some more of them, but they are not raising them anymore. And what else? I don't know. I get my salamanders now, or the axolotls, from Kijiji.
Right. Ashu, I didn't know if you had any updates or anything you wanted to talk about.
So this was the part before the training. Like I was predicting the cell fate, and this was the representation. And as it is clearly seen in this, the cell fate prediction is very poor. The cells are very spread apart. So I trained the model for about 25 epochs, and this was the prediction after the training. And it was trained on K means and KNN reclustering. And now the cell belongs to the family they belong. Like this is the EMS, and this one is the AB cell family. So I was done with the training part yesterday night, but I thought to add a graph to represent this. So I am training again, and it's in 18th epoch now, and the loss is decreasing, and the weight accuracy is increasing per epoch. So these were the results after the training, and this is the confusion matrix for prediction. Like it is predicting the cell fate, like to which family the cell belongs to, and it is using K means and K near as a declustering for three layers. Like this one is for layer three, and the cells are very spread apart. Like they are not in a cluster they belong to. Like in this family they belong to. But after the training, they are in a closer cluster in which they belong to, in which the family they belong to. It is a self-attention model for graph neural networks, and it is trained for three layers. Like the layer one is the cell itself, and the layer two is the cell around its neighbor, and the layer three is also around its neighbor, but more far one taken. Like the attention is basically contributed in two parts from vertex to edge, and then the embeddings are re- uh, embedded to its node, like from vertex to edge and then from edge to vertex. Yes, I will commit it to a repo, but I am planning to make it like complete the project first, then get a pull request, so that it would be much more clear way to, like, I will not have to edit the repo again and again.
So thank you, Ashu. Thank you for that presentation and everything.
No, I'd like to know more about it, but I'm a bit lost as to where it belongs. So
So what we're doing is we're trying to work with graph attention, and Barshan is working with graph attention as well, just in a different context. He's doing graph attention with his method, looking at the different edges of relationships in the graph, and Ashu's approaching it from a different perspective. Um, so what we're doing with our graph is, of course, we have our cells, and we get those positions of the cells through cell tracking, and we're deriving these embryo networks. So the embryo networks are connections between the cells, and for the most part, we're using distance metrics, but we can also use things like signaling and other things between the cells. They establish these edges between the cell centroids, which are then our edges, and our cell centroids are our nodes. So we have this network. And then the idea is we can use graph attention to mine that network, to look at different relationships between cells, look at the edges, see which edges are most important, see which edges are maybe of lesser importance. What are the critical edges in our network? And especially over time, what are the edges that are maybe newly generated edges that are key in the process of embryogenesis? In what Ashu's showing, she has sort of like three layers. The first being this sort of nearest neighbor relationship. So the nearest neighbor relationship is where you have two cell centroids and you have an edge, and you're looking at that edge and you're evaluating it using graph attention, and you're returning some value. Then you have these a larger expanded network. So you can think of those as like a neighborhood in something like a cellular automata, where you have these things that go beyond the nearest neighbor relationships. So we might have a chain of edges. So edges that are connected to others. We have two cells that are connected by an edge, and then two other cells that are connected by an edge, and then those are joined by the outside pairs of those uh, cells that form the first two edges, making a third edge. We might look at all of that and see how valuable that whole motif is, or how valuable that subnetwork is. And so that's kind of what she's getting at there. I think it's very valuable, especially when contrasting it with Barshan's approach, which is basically um, sort of evaluating the best edges and how that contributes to network topology and changes in the network topology over time.
okay. So someone should do neural crest cells sometime in mammals. Yeah. Or no, just vertebrates. Yeah. And well, it does facial features. So okay, thanks for the explanation.
I want to mention one more thing. Like Barshan told me that he is sick today, so he could not attend the meet.
All right, so this is the paper here, AI powered hybrid data driven framework for finite deformation. And this is the authors here and from the International Journal of Mechanical Sciences. And so this is some of the things here. What they're trying to do here is they're trying to build a large language model and trying to do finite element analysis. So, as you know, you can do different types of data analysis. You can generate code with a large language model. And what they're doing here is they're trying to reconstruct sort of the finite element analysis that we're familiar with. And so this is what they're aiming for in the paper. Let's see how well they do. So the abstract reads, constitutive modeling remains a critical challenge in simulating complex materials such as composites and biomaterials, which exhibit strong nonlinearities under finite deformation. This paper presents a novel hybrid computational framework that integrates data-driven mechanics, constitutive modeling, and generative AI. And by generative AI, they mean a large language model. Data-driven mechanics, they mean they're going to build this finite element analysis from some data, and then they're going to do the modeling to address this challenge. The key innovation lies in three synergistic contributions. First, a conditional diffusion model is developed to augment sparse material datasets by generating high fidelity, physically admissible stress strain pairs. So they're using actually a diffusion model to generate these different datasets. And so they're trying to find these stress strain pairs. So they want to find elements in the network. Overcoming the limitation of purely data driven approaches. So I guess this allows us to sample the space more completely, but also be sparse in the approach. So, if we're collecting data from the world, sometimes it's noisy. Sometimes you have very large data sets with very little information in it. Second, a dual step fixed point iteration algorithm is proposed to couple data driven and constitutive driven subdomains within a total Lagrangian description, alternating between physical projection, say like enforcing equilibrium compatibility, and material projection, which is updating data assignments via a KD search tree. Third, the unified variational formulation rigorously combines three components, ensuring mathematical consistency and numeric stability. Numerical benchmarks, so for example, a double layer beam bending and a particle filled composite under tensile loading, demonstrate that the framework achieves accuracy comparable to finite element methods while maintaining robustness across varying datasets, densities, and noise levels. So we have this, we're trying to build this finite element method from the data. After diffusion-based data augmentation, so they're really kind of using this strategy called data augmentation, which is where they're basing it on real data, but they're sort of generating data, almost like what we do with pseudo data. And this is supposed to improve the model. And so they're using data augmentation as a step, and then they're looking at the strain root mean squared error, which is then reduced by up to 92.42%. So what they're doing is they have this model, and then they use the data augmentation to improve it, and then they get these improved accuracies and reduction of mean squared error. So they reduce mean squared error by up to 92.42%. And then even with as few as 200 initial samples, the error reductions exceed 73.62%. The proposed framework provides a flexible, accurate, and efficient strategy for modeling complex materials where constitutive models are uncertain and experimental data are scarce. So this is good for cases in which we don't have a lot of good experimental data or it's very expensive to get. So we can improve our models by just kind of looking at the problem, building a classic finite element model and simulating it, but then improving it with data augmentation. So we'll start with the introduction. Advanced engineering structures, particularly in aerospace, sensors, and biomedical fields, increasingly rely on high performance composite materials to achieve lightweight, multifunctional, and highly reliable designs. Such materials, including fiber reinforced polymer composites and bio-inspired soft materials, commonly exhibit strongly coupled mechanical responses characterized by material nonlinearity, So, for example, hyperelasticity of the matrix, damage softening, and geometric nonlinearity. Conventional numeric methods based on explicit phenomenological constitutive models face considerable challenges in accurately capturing these complex behaviors. Inherent microstructural variability, fiber instabilities, and environmental degradation, etc., often lead to uncertainties or spatial variations in local mechanical properties, resulting in a lack of reliable theoretical models for certain regions. All constitutive models are inevitably constrained by their underlying theoretical frameworks and humans' current physical understanding. So we have these models that we can build of the phenomena, and we can, make them fairly fine-grained, but we don't necessarily have good, maybe a good command of the empirical groundwork that needs to be there. In recent years, artificial intelligence approaches have emerged as powerful alternatives, garnering increasing attention in computational mechanics. Among these, deep learning methods, represented by physics-informed neural networks, or PINs, and deep operator networks, or DeepONets, demonstrate significant potential for solving complex partial differential equations by integrating physical governing equations with model-free modeling. So this is where we have things that are model-free. We have these physics neural networks that kind of draw from the physical, statistical physics of the phenomena that you're working with. And so the idea is that you should be able to extract sort of the key elements of a system using PINs, or physics-informed neural networks. The universal approximation property of artificial neural networks enables them to approximate any continuous function when their parameters are properly set. In PINs, the governing equations are directly embedded as regularization terms within the loss function, ensuring that solutions adhere to physical laws while fitting available data. This methodology enables mesh-free solving in continuous space and exhibits algorithmic advantages for classical nonlinear problems, such as plasticity, and this is material plasticity, hyperelasticity or material hyperelasticity, large physical deformations, and the contact problem, or how things contact each other, or how they contact the substrate. Another significant advancement is the development of neural operators, which aim to learn function space mappings for solving differential equations. So neural operators are basically trying to figure out how to represent and solve a differential equation from data, basically. Notable architectures include the graph kernel network, Fourier neural operator, wavelet neural operator, and residual-based error corrector operator. And there are other methods as well, but they don't talk about them here. So they cite a bunch of different methods here, and these are all sort of ways to do these neural operators. I've not ever heard this term before, so this is new to me. But basically, this is what you're doing with a lot of physics-inspired neural networks, is you have these, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to solve a physics problem. And a lot of that involves trying to solve equations from data. Nevertheless, the black box nature within these methods limit their interpretability because a lot of these kinds of problems are black box problems. They're not trying to help you understand the mechanisms, they're just trying to help you understand the dynamics of the output, making it challenging to verify the engineering reliability beyond training conditions, especially in higher dimensional cases. The solution to a solid mechanics boundary value problem fundamentally requires satisfying three sets of relationships. So the first are the governing equations. So an example of that would be equilibrium partial differential equations, the kinematic compatibility equations, and the material constitutive relations. So the governing equations govern the dynamics, The kinematic compatibility equations give you the kinematics, and then the material constitutive relations give you information about the material components of the system. The equilibrium and compatibility equations are derived from universal physical principles. So what we mean by that are maybe things like Newtonian mechanics or geometric continuity, and are therefore considered well posed in general. So we don't have this problem of something being ill posed. Things behave according, say, to Newtonian mechanics, and so we should be able to predict from incomplete dynamics what the dynamics are in any single instance. In contrast, the constitutive relation, which connects strain to stress, is not universal. It is material dependent, often nonlinear, and empirically derived. So this is where we have this sort of context-dependent relationship between strain and stress. So when we have a stress-strain curve, of course, we have different stress-strain curves for different materials, and this is what they're getting at here, which is where we can't necessarily predict it for every case, and the dynamics are not, you can't basically get the same dynamics for every problem, and it's basically an ill-posed problem. Okay, so then in 2016, Kirchendorfer and Ortiz proposed a novel model-free computing paradigm named data-driven computational mechanics methods that formulates calculations directly from experimental material data, equilibrium, and compatibility constraints, thereby entirely bypassing the explicit constitutive modeling step of conventional methods. The core of their approach is a double minimization problem. So the first part of this minimization problem is that we have to find the mechanical state that is closest to a given material data set. And these are composed of discrete stress-strain pairs. So we have a bunch of stress-strain pairs, and we have them in this data set. And then we have to find the proper mechanical state, or at least approximate it. The second part of this problem is while simultaneously satisfying the physical conservation laws. So we can come up with a mechanical state, but they have to be consistent with physical conservation laws, obviously. You can't have things that don't conform, say, to entropy or to energetics. This reformulation shifts the solution strategy from fitting to solving with a constitutive model to minimizing a distance function in phase space subject to physical constraints. Since its introduction, this paradigm has been rapidly extended and adapted to many mechanical problems. Up to now, it has been used to handle a finite deformation, geometric nonlinearity. All right, hold on. Up to now, it has been used to handle finite deformation and geometric nonlinearity, material nonlinear analysis, dynamics and transient analysis, fracture problems, optimization, snap-through problems, multiphysics, as well as multi-scale and heterogeneous materials. So they've done a lot of things with it, but they've not addressed the specific thing they're doing in this paper. So, as you know, I mentioned that there are these stress-strain pairs. And so we have this problem where we have a bunch of pairwise relationships. It's kind of like building a network. We're a connectivity matrix, where we have this potentially very large number of nearest neighbor relationships. And so we need to be able to reduce the computational cost of nearest neighbor searches. And so to do that, they use a KD tree or a K-dimensional tree to organize the material data set in a way that's more computationally tractable. Siftsy and Haeckel propose a framework that couples model-free data-driven mechanics with a physical neural network, where pins serve as a data generator. In contrast to the opaque nature of deep learning methods, the data-driven computational mechanics framework offers mathematically rigorous foundations. Conti et al. Provide rigorous proofs of solution existence and convergence in both linear and finite elasticity. This level of analytical certainty is rarely achievable with neural network-based approaches. So this is where we're combining sort of a physics data set and a set of physics methods. We're looking at a very constrained problem in physics, and we're applying these physics neural networks or pins to do this. And within this context, this is actually quite a good test of that method. All right. Conti et al. Provided rigorous proofs of solution existence and convergence in both linear and finite elasticity. Okay, we talked about that. It is worth noting that a recent comparative study demonstrates the respective strengths of each paradigm. So there are two paradigms here that we're kind of comparing. The first is data-driven methods, and the second is neural networks. And so those are kind of contrasted in this citation 95. Data-driven methods are more accurate when the data is dense and closely related to the problem, while neural networks are more robust to noisy or sparse data and generalize better across different problems, though often with reduced interpretability and physical consistency. So if we just used data and trained our model with data and didn't worry about the pin application, we could get a pretty accurate model. But our data have to be dense, and basically it has to be very relevant to the model. In other words, you can't just collect data outside of maybe a highly sort of an artificial context where maybe it's just in the context of that experiment. Which means, though, that you can't really model anything outside of that. So you're kind of stuck with very tractable problems, and you can't really consider anything beyond that, which makes it hard to simulate the dynamics if you're looking at a system that is more complex than the average sort of laboratory observation. We use neural networks, of course. Or pins, we can have a model that's more robust to noisy or sparse data. So we can have our sparse data set. We can usually something that's less noisy, something that has maybe more relevant data in it. But it also allows us to generalize better across different problems. So we can actually, model a problem that isn't quite what we've observed in our training set and still get this dynamical systems prediction. Concurrently, hybrid approaches are also developed as a recurring feature of which is that while constitutive models remain challenging to formulate for specific subdomains, the material behavior in other regions can be largely characterized and modeled. A representative contribution is the coupled data-driven and model-driven solver proposed by Yang et al. In their work, the data-driven approach is applied to local subdomains where material behavior is complex or uncertain, while classical constitutive relations are used elsewhere to retain efficiency. The constitutive relations in the model-driven domain are skillfully embedded as a constraint within the global optimization formulation. Recently, it has further been extended by Yang et al. To handle non-matching meshes between different subdomains. However, to the author's knowledge, the hybrid framework is yet to be extended to the fully nonlinear material regime under finite deformation. So this is for I guess a data-driven approach, and they kind of talk about the numerical performance. So the reported numerical performance reveals a strong dependency on a dense material data set. Even in the linear elastic regime, satisfactory accuracy often requires over 10 to the 6th data points, and this gives you 100 to the 3rd positions in phase space, which is a fairly large data set and search space. Under finite deformation, this requirement becomes even more stringent as the dataset must span a larger strain domain to adequately capture geometric and material nonlinearities. So basically, you need more data, and the more atypical your strain or your stress strain relationship, the more data you need to accurately model that or to capture some of those nonlinearities. So it becomes quite hard to build a model that can predict that. Such stringent data requirements impose considerable challenges for practical experiments while obtaining dense, high fidelity stress strain pairs over a wide deformation range, which is costly, time consuming, and often infeasible. Therefore, there is a clear need for a hybrid strategy that can handle both finite deformation and material nonlinearity, where it can reliably perform on a small data set of practical, realizable scale. So that's what they're doing here. And so they talk here about how they're going to build a conditional diffusion model, augmented hybrid data, and constitutive driven computational framework for finite strain nonlinear elasticity. So they're going to build this diffusion based data augmentation model. The formulation is established with a total Lagrangian description, employing the green Lagrange strain, and the second Apiola-Kirchhoff stress is the work conjugate pair. A dual-step fixed-point iteration algorithm is derived, which alternately performs a physical projection and a material projection. The physical projection enforces the compatibility in equilibrium equations over the entire domain, along with constitutive relations in the constitutive-driven subdomain, by solving a constrained optimization problem for a line-searched enhanced Newton-Raphson method with a derived tangent matrix. So that's what they're doing here. And then to enable efficient nearest neighbor searches during the material projection, the dataset is organized in a KD tree structure after a Cholesky decomposition that transforms the energy norm metric into a standard Euclidean distance. So they're basically taking these different techniques, they're taking their data, they're reducing it to this KD tree structure, which outputs a standard Euclidean distance, which will describe these stress strain pair relationships. And then we can get on with the predictions of the dynamics. Furthermore, to overcome the limitation of sparse datasets, a conditional diffusion model is proposed and integrated to augment the material dataset. A developed hybrid framework is validated through several numerical examples, including a double layer beam and a particle filled composite under finite deformation, demonstrating its accuracy, efficiency, and capability. So let's go up to the figures. I see that there's this figure 1. And so this just kind of shows their forward and reverse process, basically. So this is a schematic of the hybrid data and constitutive driven framework for finite deformation analysis. So if you're familiar with diffusion as a method, so diffusion, of course, is a machine learning method that's become very popular. And the way it works is basically you have this forward process and this reverse process. So the forward process takes something that is a clear sort of demonstration of the world, and it adds noise to it iteratively. So if you have a picture of your pet, of your cat, say, and that picture of the cat is a high resolution picture, and you recognize it as a cat, and the model should be able to classify it accurately as a cat. You can have it, so there's nothing to learn from that image other than it's an instance of a cat. But with this forward process, you're taking this picture and you're adding noise. You might add Gaussian noise to it, so it might become less clear that it's a cat. And eventually the noise dominates the image, and there's almost nothing to recognize in the image. And so you think about this when you have this forward diffusion process, the machine can detect different patterns embedded in the noise. So it's like, it's adding robustness to the method, to the retrieval, because it's training the model not only on that image, but on instances of where noise is obscuring that image. So this becomes actually quite useful for some of these nonlinearities, because as you obscure the domain that you're on with this forward process, you basically train the model to recognize incomplete examples, and that's where this uh, advantage comes in, where we don't need as much data because the model is learning sort of, basically from incomplete examples. So that's the forward process. Now the reverse diffusion process is where we're actually recovering things out of that noise. So we're able to recover full images and reconstruct them from the noise, from the embedding of noise. And so that's the reverse process. And so in this image, what they show, and I'm trying to figure out how they have it set up here, but they have these different states that they're defining. And the states are based on the level of noise that you see here. So you see in this example, there's this arrow forward diffusion process, and you have the stress strain curve. And for each step in the stress strain curve, if you go from the right to the left, you see on the right hand side, you have this very distinct stress strain curve. You can see the dynamics. It's this sort of saturated nonlinear function. And then if you go over here, it's a little bit fuzzier with the actual function, where the actual function lies, but you can tell that it's basically that function with some variation. And then in this case, you have sort of this diffuse function. So the function could look like anything in between the boundaries of this noise streak. And then in this last image, there's nothing to learn, at least to the human eye, because everything is just pure noise. So the idea is that you can take those different transitions and learn from them and say, okay, if there's noise, then the function will look a little bit different until you can barely tell that there's any structure at all. And it'll pick up on that transition from pure signal to pure noise and be able to pick up different, variations that you might find in real world data. So it adds robustness to the model. It requires less data because it can learn from incomplete examples. And that's sort of the advantage of this diffusion process. Then this is the reverse process here at the top, which is where we have these state transitions. So you're moving across this, you're going from 0 to t minus 1 to t, which is tau, and then t diff. So this is just kind of the state machine that's representing this process. Now at the top we have this deformation. So this is a domain that we might be interested in. And we have these physical relations on this domain. We have the initial configuration, then we deform that configuration, and we can describe the deformation with equations. Then we have this domain where we have the data-driven component, the constitutive governed component, and the sort of this omega 0, which is the union of these data-driven and constitutive governed components. And then, of course, then you have this pullback. So you have the deformation, you can model that. Then you have the pullback, and you model that. And of course, this relates to this sort of diffusion process in that you basically can model sort of incomplete dynamics, and then with the reverse process, capture the state information. Okay. I hope that was clear, but I think it was. There are a lot of equations in here, as you might imagine. This just describes a lot of what they're doing here. There are a lot of physics-related models here of dynamical systems and of these different filters. So the green Lagrange strain tensor is here. This is the deformation gradient. And we have this Lagrangian in it. So let's go through some of these equations. So this present work is established upon a total Lagrangian description in a two-dimensional setting. Kind of like that picture we saw in Figure 1. The finite element discretization method is adopted for both omega c and omega d. Consequently, the displacement u can be interpolated by the shape functions in this equation, where n is the shape of the function matrix, UE denotes the node displacement array. So we have this displacement of the stress strain relations, and then we have the shape function matrix, and that's U. That's all Lagrangian. Such that the deformation gradient can be calculated by equation 3, which I didn't talk about up here, but it's basically this equation here, which is our relationship between undeformed and deformed bodies. So this is a tensor, and we have that there. That is where our gradient is configured with respect to the initial configuration, and I denotes a second order unity tensor. Okay, so then we have in this equation 18, we have this L, and that L is the differential operator. Then the element green Lagrange strain tensor becomes, so we go from this deformation gradient to this green Lagrange strain tensor, which is this component here where we have EEL and ENL. And so these two components that are additive. And so these are, I'm not familiar with the background of the math here, but basically this can be rewritten in this form. So it's rewritten as a small matrix that can be transposed. By substituting equation 17 into equation 20, the following relations can be obtained. So now we have this set of relations for E11, E22, and 2E12. And we define these, let's see. Okay, never mind. After discretization, the weak form in equation 15 can be derived in the following equivalent form. And this is the Voigt notation, which is here. This is for equilibrium state, where NE is the element number, and WE denotes the quadrature and integration weights. A is the general standard element assembly operator. FAXT represents the assembled nodal force array composed of external body force and external boundary traction. So this is the physical model here for that. Okay, then they talk about the diffusion model, which is, of course, this constitutive-driven framework. So they're using a conditional diffusion model for dataset augmentation and a fixed point iteration algorithm with KD tree acceleration for efficient nearest neighbor search. So they talk about the hybrid framework, which is established upon the double minimization principle of data-driven computing. So for the data-driven material points, the solution is found by minimizing the distance between the mechanical state and the material data set. So it's like this distinction between the state and in the data. And we saw that in the forward process of the diffusion model, where we add noise to the material data set, we can still extract the mechanical state in the reverse step of the diffusion model. These are both subject to the constraints on compatibility and equilibrium. This is equivalent to finding the state in the constraint set, C, the acceptable solution space that is closest to the material dataset D, and vice versa. So this is the equation for that, where C1 and C2 denote the physical and constitutive constraints respectively, and C1 denotes a set of admissible states satisfying compatibility and equilibrium. In the hybrid framework, this principle applies only to the data-driven subdomain, while the constitutive-driven subdomain is governed by classical constitutive relations. And so then they go on to this globally constrained optimization formulation, where they talk about, so within the present total Lagrangian description framework, consider a body wherein the material constituents are categorized into two distinct types, which are the data-driven models, which is here, and the constitutive-driven models, which is here. Where P and Q, which are at the end of both equations here, denote the number of data-driven materials and constitutive-driven materials, respectively. The entire data-driven domain is thus partitioned such that each finite element is assigned a material type and a specific material index within that type. EPK and SPK represent the kth green Lagrange strain, and the second peel of Kirchhoff stress pair in the Pth data-driven material. All right, so then let ED and EC represent the sets of data-driven elements and constitutive-driven elements, respectively, with their sizes are NED and NEC, respectively. So you're finding the union of these two. For each integration point, the current stress strain state and the total Lagrangian description is denoted by EE and SE, and its corresponding assigned pairs in the dataset. If in the data-driven region is this term here, such that a metric can be defined to quantify the distance between the two states. This is the metric here, where we have these weighted norms in the stress and strain spaces, respectively. Okay, so that's, I think, a little bit too much about the math, maybe. Let's get down to figure 2. So this is their workflow. So they set up their diffusion model, which is, of course, where we have this forward and reverse process, or this backwards process. And we're trying to learn from this multi-layered perceptron. And so once we do that, we have this learned conditional reverse process, which is where we're trying to extract states out of the data. We have this coaxially correct model of S and E, which we talked about in the mathematical part. We have our reference data, of course, which is S and E and E and S. So we have the stress and strain relationships in the data. We encode it with this diffusion model. We learn what the states are, and then we figure out what the correct coaxiality is. And then, of course, we can use our augmented data set to improve performance, where we have these stress strain pairs, which, we have the initial data here, which are these black dots, and we have the expanded data in the yellow dots, or the yellow crosses, and it gives us a way to sort of improve our resolution. So that's one of the outputs of the coaxially correct step. And then feeding into this learned conditional reverse process, we have the strain generator, which is the deformation gradient on these domains, and then plus Gaussian noise, which is going to be used in the diffusion model. And that's Gaussian noise for the stress-strain relationship. So you're basically obscuring that stress-strain relationship to recover like incomplete states of that stress-strain relationship and making it more robust in the process. Figure 3 is where we have the schematic of fixed point iteration implementation for the hybrid solver. This is a double minimization problem where we have this materials data set D. We have the constraint set C. So remember we talked about C and D, the fancy script C and D. That's what they were referring to as this constraint set versus the material data set. And the constraint set is basically where you have these continuous functions that are derived from these discrete points in the material data set. So it can be mapped to these different functions in the constraint set. And then, of course, we have our physical projection step and our material projection step in this equation. So let me zoom in on this a little bit. And so we're minimizing twice. We're minimizing for the material projection step. We're minimizing for the physical projection step. And then we have this relation here. Okay, figure 4 is where we have our flowchart of our hybrid data and constitutive-driven computational framework for nonlinear elasticity under finite deformation. So this is where we have this, I guess it goes down and then up. So we start here at the left-hand side. Our input is geometric configuration, boundary conditions, meshes, algorithm parameters, etc. Then we have our augmented data set, divide the data in constitutive-driven subdomains. So we divide that into ED and EC respectively. Then we build the double minimization formulation. So this is the double minimization step. Then we initialize our data pair, E and S, as an assignment for ED. We set our initial iteration k equals 0. Okay, so that's our augmented data set. And for step one, we start our physical projection step. We compute the residual forces and the tangent stiffness matrix. We solve the system for system increments by this set of matrices here. We then update our displacement and Lagrange multiplier. And then we ask if the algorithm is converged. If not, we go back and iterate and keep doing that until the algorithm is converged. We enforce the Armijo condition, which is here, described here. And then once the algorithm is, and we enforce the Armijo condition on the last step of this loop, where we update displacement and Lagrange multipliers. And then once the algorithm is actually converged, then we stop the physical projection step, and then we move on to the material projection step, which we start. To start that, we compute the current state for all EE and SE, which are the stress strain pairs. We transform the data space by Cholesky decomposition, which is listed here. Then we construct our KD tree structure of D. So the KD tree structure is usually done by partitioning this space with cubes. So like you're breaking it up into parts, you're subdividing it, and you're generating this binary tree with different levels. So as you break up this data space, you're generating this KD tree. And that describes these pairs in relation. Then you have this algorithm, is two-step algorithm where you loop and you find the closest data pair using KD tree search. So the closest pairs will be next to one another in the KD tree. The more dissimilar pairs will be further apart. We do that by doing this minimization step. Then we have this loop where it updates stress by constitutive relationships. And then we ask, does that algorithm converge? If it doesn't, then we go back to step one of the physical projection. So if we can't get our solution to work there, we go back to the physical projection step, rerun that, and then rerun the material projection step until we get something that converges. So you see there's this nested loop within, or this dual loop within this approach. Upon the convergence, we apply the fixed point iteration, and then once we truly have convergence, we then stop the material projection step, and then we have an output, which is deformed configuration, displacement field, stress field, strain field, reaction forces, etc. So we get a bunch of things as output from this method. This is figure 5. This is just showing some of the some of the calculations on experimental data. So this just shows some of the data that they have here. I'm not going to go through the data, but this just shows what the output maybe should look like. And this is, of course, figure 6, the double layer beam bending problem. So there's this initial configuration and boundary conditions where we can characterize those things. And we end up, so the solution for the data-driven and constitutive-driven approaches are shown in gray at the top and then blue at the bottom. And so this just shows how that's modeled as a hyperelastic material. And then B are the computational meshes that we use that consist of 492 data-driven elements and an equal number of constitutive-driven elements. So they're taking this solution for both parts of this and they're combining it into these meshes, and then they're deforming the meshes. Okay, and then they do some model verification here for standard finite element modeling, and then for this hybrid framework. So for standard finite element modeling, the idea is that this is an improvement over that method because it gives you some better it gives you better results for noisier data, basically. Okay, so I think that's all for that paper. I wanted to go over it for Susan, but I think Ashu was asking about pins in the Slack, and so I hope that was useful for her too, because this is an example, maybe not a mainstream example of pins, but basically where they're useful in the world.
Yeah, I found this paper very interesting. Like, can you share this paper on Slack?
Yeah, I'll do that. All right. Yeah. Thanks.
I was also using this architecture for the project that I had discussed.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So just a pins architecture, basically.
Yeah, like they introduced two loss functions, one for the data and one for the physics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually quite useful if you have like you know, like something like our embryo data set is not going to have the physics included in it. It's just going to show kind of, if you want to think about it as kinematics or action, then that's what you can think of. But it doesn't have the kinetics. Actually, kinetics is a bad term because that's also physics. But it doesn't have like the physical constraints underlying it. So, why do cells divide in the way they do? Why do they? Why are they constrained to the sort of the area that they're constrained to in an embryo? And there are physical reasons for that. There are also a lot of physics in cell migration that we don't ever talk about in a lot of these cell tracking methods. The cell tracking data sets aren't specific to what that is. So we have to add that in later. So that's good that we have that in a neural network where we can, um, you know, have both of those modes represented.
Like this paper has one more thing, like diffusing the noise. And I remember that Kavya once shared the document in which he has proposed three things like how cells grow from child to adult, and the third one was the similar one, like if in brain few cells are sick, or then also the whole of the brain is not affected. So we can also, like, it was a project that he has decided to work on agents for the orthogonal lab, but I don't know if he has done anything yet now. But I had talked to him, and there was an idea like in, like if we introduce the noise in the agent, and if it can still predict the things and work on the goal that has decided for it.
Yeah, so it's basically robustness. So like you can have like incomplete data, or you can have an incomplete, in that case, like a incomplete neural network even, and it can produce the output that it needs to produce. It just relies on other parts. So like sometimes a lot of complex systems are organized so that you have components that are sort of essential, but then a lot of components are sort of not superfluous, but you can do things in different ways in that architecture. So that it basically produces the outcome you want when different parts of it are incapacitated. So people will do that with neural networks, they'll prune them. And sometimes you get, you try to prune them so that you can improve your performance. And so basically what you're doing is you're taking out a lot of the things that are sort of extraneous above, below a certain threshold. And then what you're left with is like the core network. People do this with all sorts of different things, like looking for, say, like a minimal genome in bacteria or something like that, where they take away all of the sort of the extraneous or redundant components, and it's left with just the essential components. And that's, you can do that in a lot of different types of systems. And so that's another thing about like physics neural networks, is that it represents these physical dynamics in some subspace, so it doesn't require a huge amount of computational power to replicate.
Okay.
Okay. One comment, the Voigt method is actually constitutive mechanics method of doing stress strain relations.
Okay.
And yeah, it consists of dash plots and springs and that sort of thing. Like it's models that to try to model other materials.
Yeah.
At least that's what I think it is. They're mentioning it like it's a mathematical basis of something, but I guess it is in a way. So
Right.
I don't know if that's the same thing that I'm talking about or not. Like
Yeah, I don't know how that. Well, I mean
it's
that's
a
the shorthand,
Maxwell,
right?
yeah,
But you're
there's a
taking the
Maxwell Voigt um, models.
yeah, but you're
Anyways,
taking the parameters for the dashpot and spring model, and you're yeah.
yeah, so I'm not sure if that's what they're talking about, but it looks like it to me.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the equations for
For the
the
Voigt notation.
Voigt notation, then it's
Yeah.
dashpots and springs. So
Okay. Yeah.
if
And
that
this is
helps you understand it any.
yeah. Well, there's an equilibrium here, so like everything is kind of yeah. So it's an
Yeah,
equivalent to the Green Lagrange strain, maybe for this
okay.
case. Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, they've got a mathematical model and then they've got one that's sort of semi-physical
Right.
model.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know enough. I'm not a mechanical engineer.
Yeah, it was a tough paper. It had a lot of things going on
Yeah. Yes.
in it.
I
All right.
think I need to understand it in order to write a paper about modeling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think I have to include it. So,
Yeah.
uh, it could take me all summer to try to understand it, but I guess I'm just doing gardening, so why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I won't be able to come next week because at least I don't think so because I'm on the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Have to drive 9 hours.
Wow. Where are you going?
British Columbia.
Oh, okay.
Why? Well, my daughters are in Saskatchewan and then in British Columbia. So I'm visiting my daughters, but it's 9 hours from Saskatchewan to British Columbia. So
Okay. Yeah.
long day.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. All right.
so I'm on the road
All
on
right.
Monday.
Thanks for letting me know.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Have a good week. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.